What up? You're watching Delio, and in this video, I'm talking about my first impressions of the MP, not the MP, SP404 Mark II. Yeah, I have one, and I copped one because I was very curious about why are people using. Why do I see this more out in the wild than I do these? Like, for instance, so I have this weekly event that I do weekly, and where we play beats live and stuff like that. And of course, I see users on YouTube using it, but in this case, I see something totally different. I'm like, okay, this cat has two of them. This other guy brought one. What's the fuss with this? What is the deal with this? And so this video is just going to be talking about my first impression. Now, one thing I know about this is that right off the bat, this device is not something that can be shortly explained, right? I looked at a lot of YouTube videos talking about it, and it's not a very fast explained thing. The thing that stuck out to me very quickly, of course, you can see the size difference between the two, but I mean, the portability is awesome. Like, for instance, and I have to have this MPC here because this is what I've grown accustomed to, and this is where my muscle memory is developed. My muscle memory is still developing on this one. The shortcuts, the stuff you can't see. This one is almost like information overload right here, or more than enough information, right? And this one doesn't really give you much information. It's almost as though this is like an MPC 2000. What I mean by that is, when you had the MPC 2000, from what I've saw, I haven't really used one myself, but what I could see is that you only have like a dot matrix display. There's just not a lot of information you can get from your display. But as you can see on here, we have like gobs of visual information. And it's something about, and another thing is that this is battery operated. It can be powered by USB Type C. Right there, you can, like a toy. Remember toys growing up? We could just put a it's like a toy, but it's not a toy. Sonically, it does not sound like a toy. It samples at 48 kilohertz. I've seen these around, never really quite paid attention to it, though I wish when I was much younger that I was made aware of these type of things. I might have got a hold of one and did a lot of crazy stuff with it back in the day. That's in the past now. I can't change it. But this thing right here is very interesting. It's like a puzzle, and my objective is to get people bobbing their heads off of here. I do this on this, no problem. But this one has a different learning curve, different philosophy, memory card in the slot. One thing that shocked me was that when I turned it off and turned it back on, all the samples were still there. Everything, all that's there. Like,
this is real. This is real. This is real.
All my sounds,
international from the ATL.
all my sounds were loaded, or it was non. Now here, if I turn the MPC off, if I don't save, all the information is gone. But here, it's like, okay, I can make something on the fly real quick, throw this in a bag, and go. So it's a whole different thing. And then on top of that, and I have to talk about these two in between each other. So this obviously is very strong at dealing with samples, manipulate them, stem separation, but then also we have the plugins, right? We have plugins, we have instruments that we can load and really go crazy with that. But over here, there are no plugins. You got effects. There's only 4 buses. But you get easily access real-time effects like right here, right? But this is purely a sampler. This is not synthesizer sampler. Whatever. And another interesting thing to me, it's like what goes in this thing is only what you put into it. This comes with so much already in there. It's good. It's convenient. But this one, you almost have to kind of hand pick and choose what sounds you put into it. Of course, that applies to this one. But this one just comes preloaded with stuff. And yes, this one came with preloaded project and all that stuff. But when you create a new project, I can't just go ahead and dial in a piano plugin or a sub factory plugin or any of that. I can't just go to the expansion library off of the 500 gigabyte hard drive, whatever you put up in there, drag that stuff in. It's a totally, and it's just a much simpler thing here. Now, if I could talk about how the structure works, I have to kind of talk about both of these at the same time to kind of create a metaphor between how this works versus how this works. So, for example, the real-time effects, they all happen right here, right? They all happen right here. And what I notice a lot of people do with these right here, I mean, people go, I don't know why everybody goes crazy. Because I'm like, oh, I could go XY right here and drag this around and do some nice chop. But here you got different array effects that be customizable. And they're like letting the beat go. So, for example, if I could select a pattern, like. So this is like a little beat I did. But then they go. And it's like, oh, okay. But it's cool to do a lot. I think it looks cool to move those knobs. So, because this thing doesn't do short explanations very well versus this one. And maybe it's because my patience is not as high. Let's just talk about kind of like the structure, okay? So, I'll start it here. In the SP404, you have a project, right? This project contains banks from A to J, whereas on this one you have banks A to H, right? So let me just break it down. Just bear with me on this. So you have projects, right? And in these projects you have banks of patterns from A to J, banks of patterns, and separated from that you have A through J banks of sounds, right? So 10 banks of patterns, 10 banks of sounds by 16 inside of a project. Now these samples can be pitched up and pitched down. They can be stretched. They can be resampled in through effects if you want to. That's the structure here. Whereas here, I really don't know what the limitations are because I never really ran into them except for when I'm loading a bunch of plugins and I run into memory issues. But here you got a project, and drum programs are gone now. They're drum tracks. You can have many of those you want. I don't know what the limit is. I think you're only limited to how much memory you have. But inside of that drum track, you still have these 8 banks of samples. But you have plugins as well. You can have as many sequences as you want. Probably up to 127. The sequences that are on here are basically 10 by 16. So you have a lot of sequences. This can play, I think, samples up to 16 minutes. So what I've noticed is that a lot of people will do a live set from here. Now, I used to try and do live sets on this one, but I ran into problems trying to drag in whole MP3 files and sessions. I was trying to make this like a playback device, and I ran into some issues with it. And a track would stop playing. I'm like, this is cool, but it cuts off. This right here, I think what they're doing, like they'll put their whole song on a drive and then let it play the whole thing through, or trigger sound effects. Like they'll trigger sound effects and just let it ride. Whereas this one, you could do sound effects here, but I think about more here, and I'm still. It's hard to land that plane. It's hard to land that plane. And there's like a lot of shift shortcuts underneath it that have to be memorized. And there's some shortcuts here that have to be memorized too. But I think when you're in a live performing situation, it's challenging. But then at the same time, because this is purely solely based, it's almost like, how can you make this thing sound good when it's so limited? And like, this is like, yeah, you can make this sound good. How do you make it sound good with it being so unlimited? And just working with purely samples is really interesting. Now, one thing, man, I wish that the MPC had that this has that blew my mind, because I was so used to the MPC workflow. So with the SP404, you can actually hook up a USB cable to it open up an app on your desktop and drag samples to that program, and it'll shoot it right here. No load, no browse. Your computer is the browser, and you dragging whatever you want up in there, boom, and it's in there. Then I can unhook this, take it off, and go to the gig. Now, in order to do that on here, with like, how do we get the sounds onto your MPC? Well, first I got to go into controller mode. So that means I can't operate this like an MPC. And then I have to see the hard drive show up on the computer. And then I have to click and drag files onto that. Make sure that's done. I haven't made any drum tracks yet because once I'm done on that step, I have to go back and turn this back into standalone mode and hope, sometimes it don't work always, and hope sometimes that the samples that I dragged onto that hard drive are now in the browser, but now I got to go navigate to the browser, right? Navigate to the browser, select places, select that drive, select that folder, then go through the process of loading sounds in there, right? Whereas if I wanted to add a sound, like say, for example, I'm just going to do this right now because I think I remember how to do it. If I hold shift and import and I select import from SD card and then sample, and then I navigate to my samples folder.
I love it.
So like that sound effect right there. And now you see that I have just a little browser right here. And if I want to go back a folder, and it's like a push button turn thing, but now I can. So I can tap that pad right there because it's highlighted. It's letting me know what pads are not there. Tap that one right there. Import sample. Did it do it? Okay. And now I got that sample in there, right? And what's interesting here, like in that process, I have a gate, but then the similar issue on here, or the similar way you do that, say you got a sample, is you can make it go one shot, right? Which is this. It lets it play, and then if I want to change it to note on, it's the same thing as gate on here. So similar functions, but named differently. And then once I'm done importing samples, because I can keep going. Like I can find another empty one, and these blink yellow, clap. Now I can add that. Take that gate off, and just play with that. And that's very interesting. But at the same time, I have to make sure I save on this MPC before I turn it off and go. This I could just exit out. It's there, like. So we're on bank J, right? Which is kind of like my sound effects. I'm learning how to kind of create my banks here. But now I can do that. I can turn this off, right? I just turned it off. I didn't do control save. I didn't go through menu, save, project. I didn't do that. I could turn this back on and you know, no power. The batteries are dead in this thing. No power. I've unhooked it. I plug it back in without trying to destroy it. I plug it back in. Does this little splash. I don't know what that means. I heard that's customizable. We still can't customize our. Hey, you've seen the people who have their customized splash screens on there, but that's neither here or there. If I navigate back to that, all my samples are still there. All my samples are still there. So now I can. You know, so it's very interesting navigating. One of the trickiest parts is navigating between the patterns and the banks of samples. But pattern select is kind of like that going between the two. And also the important thing to recognize is like, well, how do you hit play? Because there's no play button. I know where my play button is on the MPC. But where's the play button on this? Well, when you select a pattern, when you tap the pattern number, that's the play button. And guess what the stop button is? The same pad. And then I can go here. And you can go in between the two. And I bet there's like a way to like trigger your patterns by a gate. I haven't gotten that far yet. But it's fun. It's a very sharp learning curve for me. But it is rewarding to me once I figure out what I want to do and I do it, and then the execution or the idea that came out great is already ready to go. So if I take it to a show to do a live beat making session or something like that, it's there. I can do that here, but like on this right here, I have like a bunch of beats I did, but they're in the same project under the same BPM, and they're rendering it in real time. Some of the stuff is being rendered in real time. Sometimes these are loops. I'm doing loops here too as well. And it's just a very interesting combination of things. But at the same time, if I want to play, it's very easier for me to get a nice plugin that sounds well, play it live through this, than to try and do it through here. So having a little bit of the both worlds is cool. But that's my first impression of this. Let me know what you think. See, it's already a long video because you have to really sit down and talk about this, because I'm just scratching the surface. But it's like imagine being someone who's really good at puzzles and you just got a new puzzle put in front of you to solve. That's what this is for me. Because it's music gear. I like sampling. I like sounds. I wish I had this something like this 30 years ago. The sampler I had, the first sampling hardware that I had that wasn't a computer, because I was messing around computers when I was very young, was the DJ-X. And I maxed out all those mono sampling space. But if I had like one of the original Boss units, oh my God. So moving forward with this, I'm gonna experiment with sampling stuff and a lot of stuff. There's more to talk about, but I just want to get my first impressions of it. I'm impressed with it. I did not like it at first. I had another one. I had trouble getting it running. A friend of mine let me borrow it. I was like, what's the fuss with this? It was like the IRA version of this. It's like, what's the fuss with this thing? What is the... And I didn't have the patience. This takes patience. I don't have to have much patience here because I kind of know it already, but this one really took patience. If you got patience, it will reward you, but you're going to pay the cost of patience. So that's my first impression. Hope you like this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and vibe.